Alright, making a video. Don't know if this is a very good camera angle, but we're going to go with it anyway. Yeah, it's just sort of a... thinking about having a conversation with Hofladay again, but Piro made a video and sort of indicated that he has a desire to talk to Hofladay, and I might let that happen first. Because frankly, I don't think either one of these people, or most of these philosophers, I don't think they know what philosophy is. I don't think they get it. In the sense that the truth is what we're after. And you could describe the truth as, yeah, it's the truth, and it's out there. Or you could describe it as, well, what would the smartest thing you could possibly create in the universe, the most knowledgeable, non-biased, non-personally biased, non-personally motivated thinking device come up with as a solution to the problem of what is the truth, what matters, what's the equation, what's the product of, it doesn't matter what the question is, I suppose, but ultimately it seems only logical to talk about the things that matter, that have the most importance, in order of importance. All these trivial questions, and they do seem trivial to me, of social dynamics and whatnot are just kind of bullshit compared to the bigger question of the gameplay in general. So I think it's just as a truth statement, you could say, that we are individuals in a mass of individuals, and the game is the effect of the gaming on the individuals. Well, I think it could be stated as a principle or a statement of fact or a premise or a priori that there is no consequence outside of this environment, this biosphere. I think it can be logically proven that there's little hope of any communication with some other entities, and if those entities did exist, which I doubt, and they were in any kind of form to communicate with, which is also incredibly doubtful, they're going to be in the same dilemma as we are, so they're not going to be of much use. The game really is, look, your own psychology is the game. You're motivated personally, selfishly. That's how you're constructed, as a selfish organism set loose in the world. And you have this scheming tool of a brain that enables you to do logic. To understand that this is how you go around a tree, so you don't walk into the tree. That kind of thing. It's a very useful, functional device. But the catch is that we can turn that device, that instrument, that smartness, to questions nature didn't really design us to ponder, like the purpose or function of our existence. We can look at other things besides trees, and how to swat a fly, and how to sleep with your hand over your ear so the bugs don't crawl in. Yeah, we can ponder other questions, other dilemmas, and use this logic device that can work fairly well at doing logic. But the problem is we're not doing logic, we're doing subjective, relativistic, I'm self-important bullshit. And we're mixing our personal agenda into the equation. So now we have biased the environment. We've repainted the color of the trees and changed the rules about how, if it's my kid, it's special kind of nonsense. That's what I was trying to indicate in the last video, is that these aren't logical things, these intuitions we have, these aren't functions of intelligence, they're stupid functions. There are bigotries, they're nothing to Kantianly think of as any kind of positive attribution of our psychology. They're negative manifestations of our psychology. It is this kind of fake altruism where, yeah, we're out for a hero medal or something. And so we're doing the right thing because it makes us feel good about ourselves. So again, it's a selfish equation. And this philosophical conversation about what reality is, and in that conversation, the important bit would be properly identifying what's valuable. It's really there's no point in understanding any part of reality if you can't understand the valuable bits. If you get that part wrong, then you've gotten everything that matters wrong. So who cares if you can see the texture of the bark on the tree, if you can't get the reality of the sentient creatures living in it. So that's where I would say the premises go all wrong. The whole conversation goes wrong, is these bigots want to have a conversation limited to what's in the best interest of humanity, or what's in the best interest of white people, or what's in the best interest of snooty, elitist fuckwits. And they don't really want to have a conversation about what is the net equation. So, natural is just it might as well be a synonym for retarded. There's nothing about our nature that's particularly, like I said, intelligent. The fact that we can do intelligence, again, exists for a very negative reason. It was like a sword. It was a weapon we used against the world. And we can turn it into something better than that by just changing the focus. And yeah, that's what we should be doing. So this whole endeavor is to describe reality, not to sit there and come up with some idiotic, well, what's the best kind of police state? What's the best way to keep the mob organized? What color uniform should we wear? It's a conversation you can have if all you've established as the goal is survival of human beings. So if you're just going to say nature knows what it's doing, and nature wants us to survive, or nature intends us to survive, or if we are going to be worth our salt, we have to survive, that's the only thing that matters. I don't think you've done philosophy. I think you're still just a schemer. You're scheming because you haven't justified your existence in the first place. I mean, the first thing we have to do is justify the game. And so I think the metaphor of a game is perfectly applicable in terms of understanding that games are played with maybe multiple pieces that have, different function and status, and at the end of the game is some resolution of a problem. The idea is just you can define a goal as almost anything. So in most of the games we build, there's some scoring thing, like I'm better than you or I beat you. But you can make the goal curing malaria, or you can make the goal finding the right color for the uniform. The goal can be anything. And I'm arguing that the goal in this game we're playing, because it's a game of value, a game that has sentient creatures in it, is that there must be a net performance, that you must meet certain efficiency rules, like you can't consume more than you produce. So if you are producing harm and comfort, and you're consuming harm and comfort, then it's your obligation to make sure that the harm you impose is less, than the comfort you take. Or, it's hard to compare those two. I have to be careful in my words, and I'm not. I didn't want to get into a conversation about how you define the exact values, but I'm just saying we do know that there's this negative thing called harm, suffering, pain, and that there's some sort of reward thing called comfort. And the simplest of equations can be drawn, that you wouldn't put somebody in a concentration camp for 100 years so you could enjoy a cupcake. So in those extreme cases, we can understand that's the efficiency we're talking about. That's that's what I'm claiming is an absolute fact. That it's there's no alternative reasonable theory that could ever justify incarcerating a sentient, suffering-capable organism in horrible conditions for the minor indulgence of the enjoyment of a cupcake. It can't be rationally or reasonably. There's no reasonable theory that could be constructed to make that make sense. And so those kinds of those circumstances point to an absoluteness to truth that is obtainable if we're careful enough in how we describe the world we live in. Obviously, the world we live in is very complicated, and we can't be sure of any action having a direct effect, the effect we intend. And so we have to make probabilistic estimates and compare risk factors, and that gets a little bit complicated. It gets a lot complicated. But there are principles, and we have the words for them. Consent is a principle. We have a word for it. We understand what it is, and we can know what it means if you don't got it. That maybe you have a higher standard of competency when you don't have consent. You have to be sure what you're doing. You have to be more sure of your effect. That kind of principle we can understand. We should be able to agree on those. Because again, there's no rational or reasonable alternative theory that somehow not having consent gives you less responsibility. I mean, that would be impossible, in my opinion, to come up with some sort of rational statement that explains how not having consent gives you less responsibility for your interaction. But again, this is all just a net game. You keep pretending it's something else, but it's a game of what's your end effect on the world. And some of that we can know, and some of that we can't know. We can't know all of our future impact. We can't know what effect our interactions with people had on those people, and what their influence on other people was because of our influence on them. So yeah, these are hugely complex interactions, but again, we can know in principle that there's very little likelihood that if I go out every day and start pushing old ladies, that something good is going to happen to the world. It's not likely that anything good is going to happen to the world or to the sentient life on Earth if I go around pushing old ladies. These are just logical statements that just can't be rationally defeated as logical statements. So when we get into arguments about social shit and community and all this other crap, it's just gang warfare. Then it's just gang bigotry. There's nothing intersubjective agreement. That doesn't mean anything. You have agreed to be bigots, and therefore you're right? No. So it still has to be an argument made. It still has to be logically tested, and you still have to come to this. You have to come to your critique of an idea or a statement with something like a reasonable alternative statement, and to state that value is in some notion in the head, that because I have a good intention, I have satisfied value necessity, even though I didn't really even think about what I'm going to do. I didn't spend more than 5 minutes contemplating it. I wish that the impact will be good. Yes, I have a sincere hope that the impact will be good. But if I gave it no thought, I have no reason to have that hope, and therefore my sincere intention doesn't mean anything. It's meaningless as information, because it's not informed sincere intent. So it's got to be deeper than intent. You have to have reason behind behavior. You have to be able to account for it with some sort of, here's the probabilistic wave or equation, and there's a 99.99% chance that will be the outcome, and that the 1%, the 0.001% failure rate is not catastrophic enough to justify not doing it or something like that, but that's what it's going to have to be. And again, some of these equations are not going to be easily answered in terms of the social dynamic. How many, like I said, what's the acceptable failure rate for a cure for AIDS? Let's say they had a cure for AIDS, but it killed 1 in 10,000 people. Do you have a right to impose the cure? Impose that risk? It seems a minor risk compared to the catastrophe of the new infected individuals. So, but it's still a hard question to put on the table and say, here I have the absolute truth answer, because it is complicated. But it's a minor question, and as I've stated to Haflade, all the important, the big questions don't have that nuance and can be answered much clearer, because they're violation of principle, their violation of the efficiency requirements of justifying something, creating a need that needs to exist, which is really difficult to do. Yeah, they're easy to answer by what we already know, by the fact that we know it's not proper to, impose torture for a cupcake. So yeah, I don't. The conversation really just has to be around this idea of, does some notion in somebody's head of value, like victory or I feel wonderful, does that really mean anything beyond you don't feel miserable? Does it have any power to give you authority to say for your wonderful feeling you will risk imposing a not wonderful feeling on somebody else? And I think logically it can be stated that yes, a wonderful feeling isn't worth anything if it comes at a cost where you have to violate somebody else's peace. Yeah, pretty much. So again, this is, we can I just don't see any point in talking about personal autonomy, personal victory, personal, I did okay. It's just so irrelevant in a game where your existence comes at something else's expense. If your survival is being maintained by a biosphere that goes through torture every day, and if you're not mindful, or if you haven't accounted for that price, you haven't played the game fair. You haven't acknowledged the reality of your existence. So demonstrate to me first that you can overcome that hurdle. Show me something you're doing here vital enough to justify the price the biosphere pays for human existence. And by you, I'm saying humanity in general. How can we justify the price for our little intelligent wankery, these little silly conversations we have with each other, playing little competitive games about who knows what, and who's smarter than who, and who's cleverer than who, and who put enough words together the right way, and who did it entertaining enough, and who said this, and who did that. You're playing all this little game we're playing, while sentient creatures are tortured to give us the oxygen to utter these silly fucking words and pretend we're doing something meaningful, when all we're really doing is being compelled by a motivating desire mechanism created by crude, idiotic forces that have no conception of truth. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's enough. I got something written down here, like big rated old empathy. I don't know what that is. Anyway, so empathy is not a blank of intelligence. I don't know. I don't know how I can write words that I can't read. Quite clever of me. But anyway, yes, our empathy is just an emotional reaction. And if we're just going to be empathetic through our bigotry and not extend it to a more rational or logically coherent description of deserve. Again, we're not going to be doing reality. We're not going to be doing philosophy. We're not going to be searching for the truth. We're going to be searching for statements that reinforce our own delusions of accomplishment and grandeur and worth, which is all crap. So anyway, I think that's enough for now. See, well, I don't know. Let's see how my week goes, see what I feel like doing, see what happens, blah, 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 blah.